Over 60, top 5 everyday foods that slowly destroy your eyes. Now listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you could change the way you look at your dinner plate forever. Did you know that 99% of people over 60 are eating foods every single day that are quietly destroying their eyesight, and they don't even know it? You've probably heard people say, "Oh, vision loss is just a natural part of aging." Or maybe you've been told, if your parents had bad eyesight, there's nothing you can do. Well, let me stop you right there. As a doctor who has spent decades studying how diet affects the aging eye, I can promise you those ideas are flat out wrong. Genetics and age matter, sure, but your diet, it can make the difference between sharp vision in your 70s or struggling to read a road sign in your 60s. And here's the shocking part. The most dangerous foods aren't rare, they're not exotic. They're sitting in your fridge and pantry right now. Foods you've eaten for years, foods you may even believe are healthy. But every sip, every bite is slowly fueling inflammation, starving your retina of oxygen and pushing you closer to macular degeneration, cataracts, and even blindness. I've seen patients who thought they were doing everything right, only to find out the toast at breakfast, the sandwich at lunch, or the oil they cooked with at dinner was silently sabotaging their eyesight. And once the damage is done, it can't always be reversed. That's why you need to hear this. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal the top 5 everyday foods that are secretly destroying your eyes, and trust me, you'll want to stick around until number 1 because it's something most households still think of as a healthy choice. The truth will shock you, but before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Every click helps us bring you more science-backed health advice that can change lives, maybe even save your sight. All right, let's get started, because your vision depends on what you're about to hear next. Why diet matters more than you think. After the age of 60, problems like macular degeneration, cataracts, diabetic retinopathy, and glaucoma become far more common. According to the CDC, more than 12 million Americans over 60 are living with vision impairment, and that number is expected to climb sharply in the coming years. Most people assume this is simply the price of aging or a matter of genetics. But modern science paints a different picture. Research now shows that diet and lifestyle choices play a powerful role in how well your eyes hold up over time. Certain foods quietly trigger inflammation, oxidative stress, and blood sugar spikes that damage the delicate tissues of the retina and macula. And because the eyes are some of the most energy-hungry organs in the body, they depend on a steady supply of nutrients to function properly. When you fill your plate with processed foods, sugary drinks, and unhealthy fats, you're essentially cutting off that lifeline. I've seen the contrast firsthand in my practice. Patients who relied heavily on refined carbs, fried foods, or processed meats almost always experienced vision decline much earlier than those who ate more vegetables, fish rich in omega-3s, nuts, and colorful fruits. The difference wasn't subtle, it was dramatic. One landmark project, the age-related eye disease study, showed that seniors who consumed higher amounts of antioxidants like vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, lutein, and zeaxanthin had a 25% lower risk of developing advanced macular degeneration. That means 1 in 4 cases might have been prevented simply through better nutrition. The impact of diet is just as clear when it comes to diabetic retinopathy. Nearly 1 in 3 adults over 65 has diabetes, and almost half of them will develop some form of diabetic eye disease. The American Diabetes Association has linked this directly to diets heavy in added sugar and refined starches. I think of Evelyn, a 71-year-old retired librarian who came to me convinced her vision loss was inevitable because both her parents had cataracts. When we looked at her diet, white toast with jam, ham sandwiches, fried dinners, and sweet coffee drinks, it became obvious she was fueling the problem. After we shifted her meals towards spinach, kale, salmon, and walnuts, the progression slowed, and she held on to enough vision to keep reading every day. So let me ask you, what story is your diet telling about your future eyesight? Is it protecting your ability to recognize your loved ones and enjoy the details of life, or is it slowly eroding that gift? Prevention is always more powerful than treatment. Surgery can replace a cloudy lens, but it cannot bring back a damaged retina. Eye drops can lower pressure, but they cannot restore the optic nerve once it's gone. That's why the food choices you make today matter more than you think. A study published in JAMA Ophthalmology found that seniors who followed a Mediterranean-style diet rich in fish, olive oil, vegetables, and nuts had a 41% lower risk of developing late-stage macular degeneration compared to those on a Western diet high in red meat and processed foods. Think about that, nearly cutting the risk in half. simply by choosing better meals. Small swaps, water instead of soda, salmon instead of sausage, blueberries instead of pastries, compound over time into lasting protection. The truth is, it's never too late to change. Your eyes respond quickly to what you feed them, often within weeks. So the real question is this: the next time you sit down to eat, are you nourishing your vision or are you slowly giving it away? Food number 5, sugary drinks and sweets. Let's begin with one of the most underestimated dangers to your eyesight, sugary drinks. I'm talking about sodas, sweetened iced teas, flavored lattes, sports drinks, and even fruit juices that are loaded with added sugar. They may taste refreshing, but inside your body they act more like slow poison to your eyes. Here's why. Every time you drink something loaded with sugar, your blood glucose spikes. These spikes may last only a few hours, but over months and years, they quietly damage the tiny, fragile blood vessels that supply your retina. Once those vessels are injured, they start to leak fluid or bleed, creating swelling and scar tissue that distorts your vision. This is the essence of diabetic retinopathy, one of the leading causes of blindness among older adults. And here's the frightening part. This damage can begin long before you've been formally diagnosed with diabetes. Even people in the pre-diabetic range are at risk. According to the American Diabetes Association, adults with poorly controlled blood sugar are up to 25 times more likely to develop vision-threatening eye disease compared to those with healthy glucose levels. The National Eye Institute adds that nearly 1 in 3 people with diabetes already show signs of diabetic retinopathy, often without knowing it. I'll never forget Linda, a 67-year-old grandmother I cared for. She had a habit of sipping sweet tea all day long. It seemed harmless. After all, she wasn't drinking soda, so she thought she was making a better choice. But over time, her blood sugar crept upward. She wasn't diagnosed with diabetes yet, but she started noticing blurry vision and trouble reading at night. When we examined her eyes, the first signs of retinopathy were already there. We worked together to cut out the sweetened drinks, replaced them with water and unsweetened green tea, and encouraged her to add more whole fruits and vegetables to her diet. Within a few months, her blood sugar stabilized and her vision stopped worsening. It wasn't a miracle. It was simply giving her body and her eyes a chance to heal. She isn't the only one. Another patient of mine, Michael, a retired truck driver in his early 70s, drank orange juice every morning because he believed it was healthy. What he didn't realize is that a single glass of store-bought orange juice often contains as much sugar as a can of soda. By the time he came to me, his fasting blood sugar was sky-high, and he had swelling in the back of his eyes. When I asked him what would be harder, giving up juice or losing the ability to drive, he paused, and that moment changed everything. He switched to water with a squeeze of fresh lemon and slowly began to see improvements in both his energy and his eye health. So let me ask you, when you reach for that soda, sweet tea, or so-called healthy fruit juice, do you think about the effect it's having on your eyes? Are you nourishing your vision or slowly clouding it with every sip? The encouraging news is that you don't have to give up flavor to protect your eyesight. Sparkling water with a slice of lemon or cucumber can be just as refreshing. Unsweetened herbal teas can give you variety without the sugar crash. Even plain water, something as simple as that, is a gift to your eyes. Studies show that seniors who maintain stable blood sugar levels through diet and hydration have a significantly lower risk of developing diabetic retinopathy. The lesson is simple. Your drink choices matter more than you think. They can either feed disease or fuel protection. The next time you're thirsty, remember your eyes are depending on you. Food number 4, processed meats. Bacon, hot dogs, sausages, and deli meats are comfort foods for many people, but they come with a hidden cost. These meats are packed with nitrates, sodium, and preservatives that trigger oxidative stress, a process that accelerates the breakdown of healthy cells in the eyes. Over time, this kind of damage can speed up the development of cataracts and age-related macular degeneration, 2 of the leading causes of vision loss in seniors. The science on this is clear. A 2020 study published in the British Journal of Ophthalmology found that people who consumed high amounts of processed meats had a much greater risk of developing macular degeneration compared to those who ate them only occasionally. Another study out of Australia, following more than 6,000 adults over 15 years, showed that diets rich in processed foods, including meats, were strongly linked to a higher incidence of late-stage AMD. This isn't coincidence. It's a consistent pattern we see in aging populations across the globe. I recall George, a 72-year-old patient who enjoyed bacon or ham nearly every morning for decades. When he began to struggle with reading, we ran tests and discovered early signs of AMD. He was surprised. He had always thought of those foods as just part of a traditional breakfast. After we reduced his intake of processed meats and added more leafy greens, beans, and fish to his meals, the progression of his condition slowed, and he was able to maintain his vision for years. Another case that comes to mind is Margarine, a 69-year-old retiree who loved deli sandwiches. She had no idea that the sodium and nitrates in her lunch habit were contributing to the oxidative stress in her eyes. By the time she noticed difficulty driving at night, her cataracts were already forming faster than expected. Once she swapped out the deli meats for grilled turkey and salmon, not only did her eye health stabilize, but her blood pressure improved as well, reducing another major risk factor for vision loss. So let me ask you this. Is that slice of bacon or ham worth risking the independence that clear vision gives you? Is it worth losing the ability to read the morning paper or recognize the faces of your grandchildren? The alternatives are not only healthier but often more satisfying. Lean proteins like grilled chicken, turkey, or wild-caught fish reduce oxidative stress instead of feeding it. Fish, in particular, supplies omega-3 fatty acids that strengthen the retina and protect against inflammation. Plant-based proteins such as beans, lentils, and nuts also provide steady energy without the harmful additives. The bottom line is simple. Processed meats may satisfy your taste buds for a few minutes, but they chip away at your eyesight over the years. Choosing cleaner, fresher sources of protein gives your eyes the support they need to stay strong well into your 70s, 80s, and beyond. Food number 3, fried foods and trans fats. Fried chicken, French fries, donuts, onion rings, and packaged snacks made with hydrogenated oils may be convenient and comforting, but they carry a hidden danger to your eyesight. These foods are loaded with trans fats, and trans fats are among the most damaging substances you can put into your body. They clog blood vessels, reduce oxygen supply to the eyes, and promote inflammation that weakens the delicate tissues of the retina. Even more concerning, they deplete the levels of key antioxidants like lutein and zeaxanthin, nutrients that act as natural shields for the macula, the part of the eye responsible for sharp central vision. When those antioxidants run low, your eyes are left vulnerable to oxidative stress and disease. The science backs this up. The Nurses' Health Study, which tracked more than 30,000 women over time, found that those with the highest intake of trans fats faced a significantly greater risk of developing age-related macular degeneration compared to those who consumed the least. A similar study published in the Archives of Ophthalmology reported that diets heavy in fried foods were associated with a marked increase in both early and advanced stages of AMD. These findings confirm what I've witnessed in my own practice. A steady diet of fried food slowly steals vision. Patricia, a 70-year-old patient, is a perfect example. She loved fried chicken and fast food and admitted to eating it several times a week. When she came to see me, she was having trouble driving at night because of glare and poor contrast. We worked together to reduce fried foods, replacing them with baked sweet potatoes, roasted vegetables, and nuts for snacks. Within a few months, her night vision began to improve, and her AMD risk factors decreased significantly. Another patient, Charles, a retired mechanic in his late 60s, had a similar story. His lunch often included fried snacks from the gas station near his home. When his vision tests showed early signs of macular damage, we made gradual swaps, air-fried chicken instead of deep-fried olive oil instead of shortening. Not only did his eyesight stabilize, but his cholesterol levels improved, giving him better heart health alongside stronger vision. So let me ask you, is that basket of fries or fried chicken worth risking the ability to read your favorite book, enjoy a sunset, or drive safely at night? The trade-off might not seem obvious in the moment, but over years it becomes painfully clear. The good news is that healthier choices are easy to make and just as satisfying. Baking, grilling, roasting, or air frying can deliver the same crisp and flavor without the harmful oils. Replacing hydrogenated oils with olive oil, avocado oil, or even small amounts of real butter can give your body the healthy fats it needs to protect your eyes rather than damage them. By making these swaps, you're not giving up flavor, you're choosing long-term clarity and independence. Food number 2, refined carbohydrates. White bread, pasta, pastries, and sugary breakfast cereals might look harmless on the plate, but they are anything but harmless to your eyes. These foods have a high glycemic index, which means they break down quickly into sugar, spiking blood glucose levels in a matter of minutes. Just like with sugary drinks, those rapid spikes and crashes damage the delicate blood vessels that feed your retina and lens, increasing the risk of both age-related macular degeneration and cataracts. When blood sugar is constantly on a roller coaster, the lens becomes cloudy faster, and the retina loses its resilience to oxidative stress. The research is striking. A Harvard study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that people who ate diets high in refined carbohydrates were nearly 50% more likely to develop macular degeneration compared to those who focused on low-glycemic diets. Another large-scale study from Tufts University reinforced this, showing that seniors who replaced refined carbs with whole grains and legumes had a significantly slower rate of vision decline. These numbers are not small. They highlight a direct connection between what's on your plate and how well you see. I've seen it again and again in my practice. Robert, a 74-year-old retired teacher, loved his morning bagel and evening pasta dinners. For years, he brushed it off as tradition and comfort, but slowly he developed early cataracts and the first signs of AMD. When we reviewed his diet, it was clear that refined carbs were fueling his vision problems. After switching to steel-cut oats, quinoa, and whole-grain bread, his eye health stabilized. More than that, his energy levels improved, and he told me he felt more steady throughout the day instead of crashing mid-afternoon. Another patient, Diane, a 68-year-old grandmother, came in with blurry vision and headaches. She had been eating pastries for breakfast and snacking on crackers all day. Her blood sugar was high, and her eye exam showed early vascular changes. We shifted her diet to include lentils, leafy greens, and barley. Within 6 months, her blood sugar improved, her vision stabilized, and she felt sharper both physically and mentally. So let me ask you this. How often are those innocent bagels, crackers, or bowls of cereal sneaking into your day? And is the short burst of comfort worth the long-term cost of your eyesight? The good news is you don't have to give up carbohydrates altogether. You just need to choose the right kind. Whole grains, beans, and vegetables release energy slowly, keeping blood sugar steady and protecting your eyes from the stress of constant spikes. Think of it as trading a quick sugar rush for steady fuel that keeps your vision clear and your independence intact. Every time you swap white bread for whole grain or pastries for fruit and nuts, you're making an investment in your eyes that pays off for years to come. Food number 1, margarine and processed vegetable oils. It may come as a surprise, but margarine and heavily processed oils such as soybean oil, corn oil, and canola oil are some of the most damaging foods for your eyes. The problem lies in how these oils disrupt the delicate balance between omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in your body. When omega-6 intake far outweighs omega-3, it fuels chronic inflammation. And that inflammation doesn't just affect your joints or heart. It extends to the retina and macula, quietly eroding your vision over time. The science is clear. A large Australian study revealed that people whose diets were high in omega-6 vegetable oils faced a much greater risk of developing age-related macular degeneration. On the other hand, those who consumed more omega-3s from sources like fish, flax seeds, or walnuts saw a reduced risk. The difference between these two groups was dramatic, showing that the type of fat you eat can either protect your eyesight or accelerate its decline. Another study in the Journal of the American Medical Association supported this finding, showing that seniors who consumed fish rich in omega-3s at least twice a week lowered their risk of advanced AMD by nearly 40%. I've seen this play out in real life many times. Mary, a 69-year-old retired nurse, used margarine every day for decades, believing it was the healthier choice over butter. By her late 60s, she was diagnosed with advanced AMD. After we reviewed her diet, she replaced margarine with olive oil and added salmon to her meals twice a week. Within a year, the progression of her disease slowed significantly, allowing her to keep much of her functional vision. Another patient, Thomas, age 71, cooked almost everything in corn oil because it was inexpensive and convenient. He came to me with blurred central vision, and testing confirmed early macular degeneration. When he switched to avocado oil for cooking and added walnuts and sardines to his diet, his eye health stabilized, and he noticed better energy and less overall inflammation in his body. So let me ask you, what kind of oils are sitting in your kitchen right now? And are they protecting your vision or quietly damaging it? The choices you make when you spread something on your toast or sauté vegetables for dinner have long-term consequences for your eyesight. The encouraging part is that the healthier swaps are simple and flavorful. Olive oil, avocado oil, and moderate amounts of real butter can be used in place of margarine and processed oils. Foods rich in omega-3s like salmon, sardines, chia seeds, and walnuts not only support your eyes but also improve heart and brain health. These small daily decisions add up. By choosing oils and fats that fight inflammation instead of feeding it, you give your eyes the best chance to stay sharp, clear, and strong well into your 70s and beyond. So there you have it, 5 everyday foods that may taste familiar, but are quietly destroying your eyesight after 60. Sugary drinks and sweets that spike your blood sugar, processed meats that fuel oxidative stress, fried foods and trans fats that rob your retina of oxygen, refined carbs that accelerate degeneration, and finally, margarine and processed oils that inflame your eyes from the inside out. But here's the good news. Every harmful food on that list has a healthier swap. Water instead of soda, fresh fish instead of bacon, olive oil instead of margarine, whole grains instead of white bread. Each small change is like giving your eyes a shield, protecting your vision so you can keep reading, driving, enjoying sunsets, and recognizing the faces you love most. Remember this, your eyesight isn't just about seeing clearly, it's about independence, freedom, and quality of life. And you have far more control over it than you might think. The choices you make at the table today can mean the difference between fading vision and years of sharp, vibrant sight tomorrow. If this video opened your eyes, literally and figuratively, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone you care about, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another life-changing health tip. Every click helps us keep creating videos that protect your health and extend the best years of your life. Thank you so much for watching, take care of your eyes, and I'll see you in the next video.